Hi, today I want to share with you how you or someone you know maybe can check whether you are insulin resistant, and if you are, how bad it is. Now, there are limitations to this test as there are to most tests, but what it can reveal is a step before the step that your doctor or GP usually notices when they are checking your blood glucose, when your blood glucose is high, or when it takes time for your blood glucose to go down with an oral blood glucose tolerance test. So before someone develops type 2 diabetes, what happens is that this person is in a state of insulin resistance for quite a few years, for some people decades. Okay, so that means that your pancreas releases a lot more insulin than what is considered normal in order to keep your blood sugar levels at a normal level. So when you eat, your blood sugar will go up and then it will go down again within 2-3 hours, as if you were not insulin resistant, as if everything is working normally. So it looks like you are healthy, but in order for you to have normal blood sugars, your pancreas is releasing massive amounts of insulin. So it's working overtime and it's working really, really hard to keep those blood sugar levels at bay. It's not until your pancreas fails to produce enough insulin to take care of that blood sugar, it's not until then that they usually detect that you have type 2 diabetes. So as long as your pancreas is able to keep up with this and maintain the ideal blood sugar, your doctor won't notice. They won't do an insulin test most of the time. They will only look at your blood glucose levels or your HbA1c possibly to pick it up. But if your blood glucose is good most of the time, your HbA1c is going to be good as well. So when this happens, that your pancreas is creating a lot of insulin, you are in a state of hyperinsulinemia, which just means that you have too much insulin in your system. And very few doctors ever order a fasting insulin test unless you ask for it. So if you're someone who just kind of suspects that maybe I'm diabetic, but I have okay blood sugar levels, you could go to your lab or your doctor and you could just ask if they can do a fasting insulin test. So do a fasting insulin test rather than a C-peptide. You can use C-peptide, but for the calculation I'm using to calculate my results that I'm going to show you, you need to have the fasting insulin levels. There is a different formula for C-peptide and it shows a little bit different results. So there is one problem with measuring fasting insulin, and that is usually the excuse for why they don't take this test for you. And that is hard to measure insulin accurately because it's released in pulses. So it's literally stored in little vesicles in your cells, and then it says, okay, it's time to release insulin, and you just like all of it comes out at once, and then so it comes in pulses. So the insulin levels, if you're measuring them, they're going to go up and down, up and down, up and down. So depending on when you're actually taking the test, you are going to get a different result. So if I take a test now and I take a test in 5 minutes, those tests are not going to give me the same number. So that's kind of important to keep in mind. However, usually when they've done studies on this, it's usually plus minus 10%. So if you just calculate a worst case scenario, which I'm going to do for my test, if it was 10% higher than the value I actually got, then I'm probably fine if that test is fine. If you are way out of range, you know that even if it was 10% better, you would still be out of range. So if you're borderline, you would probably have cause to still worry. Okay, so we can still use this, but don't take it as a definite number as such. It's just an indication, but it can tell us a lot. Okay, so how you do that is if you get a lab test and it says 1, now I'm just making this number up because you're probably not going to get a 1. Your real value lies between 0.9 and 1.1. So that's plus minus 10%. So I'm using 1 just because it's easy to calculate. So I'm going to show you some real figures in a second. So there is a calculation that you can use, and you're calculating your HOMA-IR. So that is the homeostatic model assessment of insulin resistance. Okay, you don't need to remember that, that's not important, but that's what it's called. So with this model, you can use it to assess whether you are insulin sensitive or insulin resistant. So if your calculated value is less than 1, you are insulin sensitive, and this is ideal. This is a good thing. If it's above 1.9, you are supposedly in the earlier stages of insulin resistance. So this is most likely fairly easy still to reverse this condition, but not necessarily. And if it's above 2.9, you are having significant insulin resistance, and it might take you a little bit longer to reverse your condition, but it's still possible. I don't believe it's impossible for pretty much anyone to do that. So to calculate your HOMA-IR, what you need to know is your fasting plasma insulin levels, and that should be in the units micro IU per milliliter. So that's micro international units per milliliter. And then you need your fasting plasma glucose in milligrams per deciliter. Okay, so here are my values. We'll just put them on the screen there so you can see them. So I'm in New Zealand, and you see my plasma insulin was 17 picomole per liter. So when I translate this to micro IU per milliliter, we get 2.38. So that is my fasting plasma insulin. And down at the bottom you see my plasma blood glucose, which is measured in millimoles per liter, which was 4.7. That's quite high for me, but it's still not high, it's still a pretty good number. And that is the same as 84.6 milligrams per deciliter. So now this is really, really simple to do. All you do is that you take these two numbers, you multiply them, and then you divide them, or the number that you get, by 420. So in my case, 2.38 times 84.6 divided by 420 will give me 0.48. Okay, and let's say that I took this measurement when my insulin level was at its lowest, so my real value is 10% higher. That means that it would be 2.62. If I'm calculating this, my HOMA-IR score is still 0.53. So I'm perfectly healthy, I'm insulin sensitive, everything's fine according to this test. If you don't like doing maths, there are HOMA-IR calculators that you can use to go and check yours, and you can just go to thebloodcode.com/HOMA-IR-calculator. And you just put your numbers in, and it will tell you what your HOMA-IR score is. It will also tell you how to convert from picomoles per liter to micro IU per liter, or from millimole per liter to milligrams per deciliter if you are in this part of the world, or any part of the world that doesn't use the American numbers. So if your HOMA-IR is coming back at, let's say, 0.8 to 0.9, although this is considered insulin sensitive, I would like to caution you to have a little look at what you are doing, your diet specifically. In my opinion, this is elevated because it's kind of on creeping up. It's not normal that it should be that high, so you might just want to be a bit careful with what you're doing. So you're kind of on your way to insulin resistance. If your HOMA-IR is through the roof and you need some help on getting those numbers down, you can either email me at pim@smartdiabeticsacademy.com, or you can just join our Facebook group for type 2 diabetics, and you'll find the address here in a second. And also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss any other videos that I'm putting out. We're going to talk a lot about this. I'm going to come back and talk about a different kind of test that will show insulin resistance in a much earlier level, even though it's not a very common test, but we're going to talk about it just so that you know that it exists in case you would like to try it one time. So I'll see you then.